Six Flags traces its origins back to 1957 and has had a tumultuous history. On my previous video looking at the Cedar Fair business model, you can see their history in comparison is almost, well, boring. Six Flags history has been a whirlwind of acquisitions, sell-offs, splurging, pinching pennies, bankruptcy, and resurgence. Their business model 20 years ago is unrecognizable compared to their business model over the last 10 years post-bankruptcy. And that's what I'm going to focus on in this video. Over the last several years, Six Flags has made it a point to give all of their parks something new every year, but some parks are definitely favored over the others. Here are the winners and the losers of the Six Flags chain. I'll be using two key data points in this video, and that's attendance and population. In my Cedar Fair video, I had a lot of people telling me that I missed major city centers within a range of their parks, and that makes sense because I did all of that manually. However, for Six Flags, I pulled the population statistics straight from the 2018 shareholder report, so this is coming directly from the chain as they look to see how many people live within 100 miles of their parks. Also, unlike with Cedar Fair, I actually have exact attendance numbers per park with the exception of Great Escape and Frontier City. Unfortunately, I won't be able to report on the individual park's contribution to the chain's revenue, since that information is not available. One last data point I will use for perspective is the amount of land that belongs to each park in the chain. There are 15 amusement parks in the Six Flags chain, but for this video, I won't be talking much about their newest acquisitions, Darien Lake and Frontier City. Both were Six Flags parks prior to the chain's bankruptcy in 2009, but we don't have enough of a track record for these parks to see how Six Flags wants to handle them this time around. After taking over in 2018, Six Flags announced a new kids area for Frontier City and a Fun Time Starflyer for Darien Lake to open in 2019. Without a real track record, all we can do is look at the stats in order to get an idea what Six Flags may be willing to invest in these parks. Frontier City is the second smallest park in the chain with just 113 acres and is dead last in population with 2.9 million people. The attendance numbers aren't available, but I imagine it would be in the bottom few. The Oklahoma City metro area has only experienced a 13% growth over the last decade, so it makes me wonder what Six Flags saw in this property. I've been here, and it has a completely different feel from other Six Flags parks. It feels very much like a small local park, so it'll be interesting to see how much influence Six Flags has on it. Six Flags is not putting their name on the park, and given the way they treat their other parks that don't don the Six Flags name, it doesn't bode well for Frontier City. As for Darien Lake, this park pulls in 1.27 million people a year, which puts it 11th in the chain, and it draws its locals from the Buffalo area, which accounts for 10.9 million people, which puts it in the middle of the pack at 8th place. But here's one thing that may shock a lot of people and something that was noticeable during my visit. It ranks second in the chain in size with 982 acres. This definitely felt more like a major Six Flags park when I was there in 2018, and the park has a ton of potential. The attendance and the population numbers are nothing to shout at, but it could be good enough for Six Flags to feed some decent attractions into the park over the years. So now we're left with the 13 parks that have a real track record with Six Flags. With my Cedar Fair video, I was able to place their parks into 3 tiers: the haves, the have-nots, and the ones in the middle. Six Flags doesn't break down quite as easy. Even though I think there are 4 tiers in the chain, not every park in each tier is equal. So I'll be showing you the tiers, but also ranking the parks within the tiers. Unlike most countdowns, I'll be starting at the top and then working my way down. There are 2 parks in the top tier of the Six Flags chain. These are the parks that get the most attention and the best attractions for good reason. The top park of the top tier is Magic Mountain. Whether this is the best Six Flags park or not is debatable, but there's no doubt that this park is the crown jewel for Six Flags as a company. This is one of the few year-round parks, and as of 2018 started opening 365 days a year. Because of this, they rank first in the chain with 3.3 million guests a year, drawing from the 19 million people from the Los Angeles area, the third most populous area in the chain. Six Flags purchased this park in 1979 and continued the culture of innovative and record-breaking coasters that preceded them with the world's first modern coaster with a vertical loop, Revolution, in 1976, and the world's tallest coaster, Colossus, in 1978. Magic Mountain has never gone more than 3 years without a coaster since the mid-80s, until recently. There was a 5-year stretch where Magic Mountain added a coaster every year between 1997 and 2001, a total of 7 coasters in that span. Even post-bankruptcy, Magic Mountain has added 6 coasters since 2011. The 4-year span between Twisted Colossus and West Coast Racers has been the longest coaster gap in decades. But in the meantime, the park filled in some major gaps in their lineup with the Justice League Dark Ride and Crazanity. Magic Mountain always gets knocked for not having good rides that aren't coasters, but that is slowly turning around. Back in the early 2000s, Six Flags touted Magic Mountain as the extreme park, and were loading it up with extreme thrill coasters, and that's not the case with their new business model. But I don't think anyone can make an argument that any park is treated as well as Magic Mountain in the Six Flags chain. There's a massive housing development that is under construction that will surround the park, and that will incentivize Six Flags to make Magic Mountain that more attractive to new customers. The other park in the top tier, and number 2 overall, is Great America. This park actually has gotten coasters at a 2-year pace since 2008, with the exception of the 3-year gap between Goliath and Joker. They also have installed a Justice League Dark Ride and a record-breaking Larson Superloop over the last 4 years. This park is in a fantastic location, right in between Chicago and Milwaukee, so it serves 13.9 million people within 100 miles of the park, which is 6th in the chain. And because of the park's quality, it draws in 3 million guests a year, which ranks it 3rd in the chain. I think this park is one of the best in the country. It has possibly the most balanced coaster collection of any park, and with its great location, it should continue to be a favorite for Six Flags. The 3 parks in the next tier should feel pretty good about themselves. They're definitely taken care of by Six Flags and seem to have a bright future ahead of them. Let's start with the number 3 overall park in the chain, one that has arguably fallen out of the top tier recently, and that's Great Adventure. There's no reason to doubt why this park has gotten so much attention. It serves the 29.7 million people of the New York and Philadelphia areas, which is 2nd place in the chain, and it also ranks 2nd in attendance with 3.2 million. It's pretty impressive that this park brings in almost as many people as Magic Mountain with a shorter operating schedule. This park is also 1st in acreage with an astounding 2,200 acres, which includes the land used for the safari, which by itself would be a top 5 Six Flags park in terms of land. Six Flags was hyper-aggressive with this park at the turn of the century, with Medusa, Nitro, Superman, King Ka, and El Toro. But after El Toro, they've just gotten a Dark Knight Wild Mouse clone, the relocated stand-up coaster Green Lantern, and the Joker 40 Freespin. It really has been a weak dozen years for coasters, which is why I have this park outside the highest tier. Though with their 2020 announcement coming soon, it could be working their way back up. Over the last 10 years, they've added 5 flat rides, a Skyscreamer, the world's tallest drop tower in Zumanjaro, a Larson Looper which has since been removed, a Justice League Dark Ride, Cyborg Cyberspin, and Wonder Woman. So they've quietly been filling out their park over the years, and hopefully they'll be making the move back into thrill coasters in the years to come. The next park in the 2nd tier is Fiesta Texas. A lot of people will peg this park as top tier, even 2nd in the chain, but I say not so fast. They're definitely rising, with 2 coasters from Rocky Mountain Construction coming in the last 6 years, plus the original S&S Freespin. Since 2012, they've also gotten 3 solid flat rides and 2 water park expansions. Fiesta Texas is in the bottom half of the chain for attendance, with 1.4 million guests, which is good for 9th place. They're also near the bottom in population, drawing from 4.8 million people in the San Antonio and Austin areas, which puts them in 12th place. For good measure, Fiesta Texas is also in the bottom half of acreage. Their 220 acres ranks them 10th in the chain. One thing that the park has going in its favor is the population trend lines. From 2017 to 2018, San Antonio was the 2nd fastest growing city in the country, just behind Phoenix, and having that kind of growth in the actual city where the park is located is attractive to the chain. As of last year, San Antonio is actually the 7th most populous city in the US, and if you look at some of the cities that rank above it, they represent the parks that have already been mentioned on this list: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Philadelphia. So ultimately, it makes sense that this park would be in 4th place in terms of investment from Six Flags. The final park in the 2nd tier is Six Flags New England, and if you've been here, you'll know what kind of area this park is in. You basically roll into a small town and suddenly find a major amusement park on the side of the road. This park will be 150 years old next year, which explains why it wasn't built off a major highway. Instead, it was built right next to the Connecticut River, which explains why it was called Riverside Amusement Park up until Six Flags took over in 1999. And Six Flags has done a world of good for this park. they immediately put in a world-class Intamin hypercoaster in Superman Ride of Steel, along with 2 other coasters in 2000, the B&M floorless coaster Batman the Dark Knight in 2002, and then a Pandemonium in 2005. After the Dark Knight Wild Mouse coaster fell through in 2008, and after the chain came out of bankruptcy in 2010, Six Flags has added 4 more coasters between 2011 and 2017, and all signs point to another new coaster coming in 2020. Granted, none of these recent coasters were groundbreaking investments. They relocated Gotham City Gauntlet from Kentucky Kingdom and Goliath from Six Flags Magic Mountain. Wicked Cyclone is an RMC conversion, which don't have a huge price tag, and Joker is a cookie-cutter clone. But regardless, the 2 to 3 year timeline for new coasters is something that not a lot of other parks can brag about. But Six Flags sees a reason to put a solid investment in this park. They've also gotten some good flat rides over the last 5 years, including the 400-foot Skyscreamer. Six Flags New England is right in the middle of the chain in attendance with 1.7 million people annually, good for 7th place, and also land right in the middle with 262 acres, which puts them in 8th place. The stat that explains the park's lofty status in the Six Flags chain is the population center. Six Flags considers this to truly be the park for the entire New England region. It pinpoints Boston, Hartford, New Haven, Providence, and Springfield, 5 cities across 3 states, as the park's target clientele. All in all, that encompasses 16.6 million people, good for 4th place in the chain. Given the lack of competition in the northeastern US, Six Flags just has to keep this park relevant in order to draw people from New England to this park over lake compounds and Kenobi Lake, especially since Great Adventure is a few hours away. And now we have the 3rd tier. These 4 parks can expect something good once in a while, but have a more sketchy timeline and could spend the better part of a decade in the dark. But let's start off with a surprising park that actually leads the 3rd tier, Discovery Kingdom. Like most Six Flags parks, they flourished around the turn of the century, getting 7 coasters in a 4-year span. Their next 2 editions did not last long at the park, but they got the chain's only Skyrocket 2 in Superman Ultimate Flight back in 2012, and since 2016, they have really been making a push. Again, nothing groundbreaking, but we're still talking about Six Flags here. We have the RMC conversion of Roar into Joker, a giant discovery, the world's first Skyline Skywarp, and then the SNS Free Spin for 2019. Six Flags is building this park up at the same time their biggest rival, California's Great America from the Cedar Fair chain, is also rapidly improving. Discovery Kingdom is in Vallejo, which is pretty close to the halfway point between San Francisco and Sacramento, and Six Flags targets those cities along with Oakland to draw from 12.2 million people, good for 7th place in the chain. And they're right in the middle in attendance with 1.5 million, which is in 8th place. Its 135 acres ranks at 13th, and it could explain why all of their recent additions are crammed into one section of the park. But if you've been there, you know there's a big back section of the park that's easy to get lost in, and this park also has animal exhibits and shows, and that's unique to Discovery Kingdom, and you won't find that anywhere else except for Great Adventure. But seeing as it ranks in the middle of population and attendance, it's no wonder that it ranks around the middle on this list. The next park in the 3rd tier is also a park that's been getting more attention lately, Six Flags Mexico. People took notice back in 2014 when they got one of the first RMC conversions, Medusa Steel Coaster. This was the year after they got the relocated Gerstlauer spinner the Joker from Discovery Kingdom, and since then they've also added an SNS Free Spin. They've also recently got a Starflyer and a Justice League Dark Ride, and 2 years ago opened up a brand new water park. It's not the greatest lineup or the greatest additions, but it's a park to keep an eye on. It could be a park that makes a splash in the near future. After all, nobody in the chain can claim a population center like Six Flags Mexico. Mexico City is one of the most populous cities in the world, and the company identifies 30.7 million people it could draw from, which is just barely more than Great Adventure and is good for 1st place. This is also a year-round park that draws in 2.6 million guests a year, which is 4th place in the chain. It's also the smallest park in the chain in terms of acreage, with just 110. So space could be an issue for the future, but there are a ton of people in the area, and the small parks in the city can't compete with Six Flags Mexico, so this park is in a pretty strong position. Let's move on to another park in the 3rd tier, one that's kind of frustrating, and that's Six Flags Over Texas. This was the park that started the chain and is in the backyard of their corporate headquarters, but since adding Titan in 2001, they've just gotten a Pandemonium clone, New Texas Giant, and the Joker 40 Free Spin. And for 2020, it looks very likely that they'll be getting a Mock Rides Power Splash, which frankly isn't that huge thrill coaster that is overdue for this park. They've been adding nice flat rides since 2013, including the 400-foot Skyscreamer, a Justice League Dark Ride, a Giant Discovery, and an Endeavor. And over the last 2 years, Harley Quinn's Spinsanity and a Larson Superloop. I think Over Texas is in a similar position as Great Adventure, a good park that has felt shunned recently, but has quietly been filling out their lineup of attractions before getting the next big thrill coaster. I think Great Adventure will get some kind of launch coaster next year, while Over Texas is looking at the Power Splash. So that's a little disappointing since they'll likely have to wait a few more years before their next coaster comes along. Over Texas has a longer operating schedule than other parks in the chain, but isn't quite year-round, so it draws in 2.6 million people, which is 5th place, and looks to pull in the 8.4 million people in the Dallas and Fort Worth areas, which is 10th in the chain. Its 217 acres is 11th in the chain, and there's no room for expansion here since the park is surrounded by freeways and stadiums. The final park in the 3rd tier is Six Flags Over Georgia. This is almost a carbon copy of Six Flags Over Texas in every way. It serves the 9 million people in the Atlanta area, which is 9th in the chain, and it comes in just behind Over Texas in attendance with 2 million people annually, coming in 6th place. It also has some frustrating gaps in its lineup, getting solid additions in 2006 with Goliath, 2011 with Daredevil Dive, and 2018 with Twisted Cyclone. Good rides, but 5 to 7 year gaps between them. Just like Over Texas, the last 6 years have also seen a Starflyer, Larson Looper, Justice League, and Giant Discovery. These were the 2 original Six Flags parks, and they seem to be on a very similar path, especially since the next coaster rumored for Over Georgia will be an SNS Freespin, which Over Texas received a couple years ago. Over Georgia stays out of the lower tier because of these nice additions, but those gaps are double what the higher tier parks can expect. And now for the sad bottom tier. These 4 parks have the hardest time catching a break, and I don't see a whole lot of hope for them in the future. Let's start with the best of the worst, Six Flags St. Louis. It's actually in 5th place in the chain with 320 acres, and report to have 17 undeveloped acres, but they aren't doing a whole lot with it from a coaster standpoint. After adding Evel Knievel, aka American Thunder, in 2008, they got Over Texas's Boomerang in 2013, and that's it for coasters. They've gotten a couple water rides and flat rides, the most interesting being the new for 2019 Zamperla Endeavor, Supergirl. This park only draws in 1.34 million people, which is 10th place in the chain, and the company only identifies the 4 million people in the St. Louis area to draw from, which is in 13th place. The park doesn't have much competition in the area, since Worlds of Fun, Silver Dollar City, and Holiday World are all around 200 miles away. It seems like this is doomed to be a Six Flags park on the lower end of their priority list, but that doesn't mean that they won't get a big thrill out of a minor investment. I think sooner rather than later, St. Louis will get an RMC Raptor, which will be a great addition and the true standout coaster the park needs. The next park in the bottom tier is La Ronde. Their last coaster was the relocated Vekoma SLC Ednor back in 2010, and that's pretty brutal. But if you look at the last 8 years of additions, they've gotten 9 flat rides in a row. That's pretty impressive. Some of these are classic Six Flags additions like a Starflyer, Giant Discovery, and a Larson Loop. They've also gotten a Tilt-A-Whirl, a Chance Falling Star, Flying Scooters, a Mondial Rollover, and even a Haunted House back in 2015. I was actually more impressed with these additions than the additions of the next park on this list that most people would assume should rank above La Ronde. As for the stats, La Ronde ranks in 12th place with 1.25 million people annually, and the 6.1 million people in the Montreal area put La Ronde 11th in the chain. I don't think much will change for this park. The rumor is that they may receive Magic Mountain's Green Lantern first flight in the next year or two, and God help them if they do. Barely staying out of the basement is Six Flags America. This has been a joke in the chain for a long time, but there was a time where this, along with a lot of other parks, was getting bombarded with new coasters. Roar, Joker's Jinx, Two-Face, Superman Ride of Steel, and Batwing all debuted between 1998 and 2001, and then that door slammed shut for the next 11 years. Batwing would be the last ground-up coaster to be added to the park. They looked to Six Flags Great America in Illinois for a couple hand-me-downs, first Apocalypse in 2012, and then Ragin' Cajun in 2014. So what else has Six Flags America gotten in the meantime? 3 water park additions, a Larson Superloop, a Starflyer, and turning their stand-up coaster into a floorless coaster. Now do you see why I put La Ronde ahead of this? Six Flags America is actually in a gray area, right next to the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. areas, which account for 14.1 million people, which is 5th place in the chain, but only draw 1.1 million people annually, good for 13th place. It also ranks in 3rd place with 515 acres, with 300 acres undeveloped. The Six Flags Corporation doesn't seem to take a lot of pride in this park, and the people on the ground level don't seem to care much either. This is on the short list of worst parks I've been to, and with the abundance of land plus the population center they can work with, there's no excuse that this park is performing as poorly as it does. I'm hoping that Six Flags can find it in their hearts to invest $8 to $10 million to RMC Roar and give poor Six Flags America a really good standout coaster. Finally, let's head to upstate New York for the Great Escape. Their coaster additions are basically non-existent. Their best coaster is a relocated Woody, and over the last 10 years, it's been half water park additions and half smaller scale flat rides. The attendance numbers weren't available for this park, but I'm sure it's in the bottom 2 along with Frontier City. Frontier City is the only park with a more sparse population center also. Great Escape ranks 14th with its 3.1 million people in the Albany area. It actually ranks 4th with 345 acres, but Six Flags does not and should not feel the need to invest a lot of money here. So there are my rankings of the Six Flags parks in terms of how the company is choosing to spend their money. One noticeable thing about Six Flags is that their parks seem to be centralized in huge population areas, while Cedar Fair parks are generally in the middle of nowhere. The Six Flags business model is to attract people to their parks every year by offering a little something new. It won't be anything groundbreaking or award-winning, and it likely won't even be original. But Six Flags thinks that they can appeal to the masses by giving them a new reason to visit their local park each year. Because of this spread the wealth model, the difference between the top tier and the bottom tier isn't as huge as the gap between the tiers in the Cedar Fair chain. But those parks that have a big population center to draw from and are successful in drawing in the most people will keep getting the best of the cheap options that Six Flags chooses to go with. So thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you're new here and want to see more content like this. And let me know in the comments below if you have any thoughts or critiques of the Six Flags business model and how this compares to the Cedar Fair chain.